Lotje, and Steve for inviting me to come and speak. I realize I'm the only thing that's between you and the film, so I won't take up too much time, I hope. I was asked to talk a little bit about the relationship between the mind, the brain, language, and maybe music as well, because of what we're going to see in the films. It's very interesting that left to our own devices, we are creatures as human beings who will very naturally acquire the capacity to speak and the capacity to make music. It's something that we do effortlessly, and they have something obviously in common. When you think of discrete items, like the phonemes that get assembled into words, and the tones that get assembled into music, and that they both depend on temporal sequencing and staging, it might make you think that they're so close and so related that they must be generated from the same source in the brain, and that's absolutely not true. We know that how language works and what it depends on is really a rather different functioning system than the system that we rely on and depend on for music. And so it's very interesting to think what the origins of the two might be and what the need for them might be. When we think about language, we tend rather quickly to think of it as communication. We tend to think that by using these words, I get right through to somebody else's mind, and it's true. It's a very direct form of contact between individuals. Just by using these words, I get right into your mind to amuse you or upset you or insult you. Words are dangerous. You use them at your peril. You can't take them back. They show you, in a sense, how easily violated someone else's mind is just by talking to them. It's a very powerful thing. But we also use language and our own words to formulate a view of ourselves, because language is used for the expression of thought, not just for the communication of what we're thinking to one another. And stripped of language, as Lotje was, you wonder to yourself what relation that puts you in to your thoughts and to your experience and to your sense of self. I think language is very important in a personal way to developing a sense of self. Because if you think of your first 2 years without language, as you're babbling and rehearsing for speech, first 2 years of life, none of you remember anything about it. If you claim to remember something about your first 2 years, it's probably because an older person told you, and you now recount the story as if you remember it from the inside. But there is this thing which we call childhood amnesia. And the childhood amnesic years, the first 2 years, you really don't have experiential memories. Why not? Well, it happens that you don't have language to use at that stage. So it's a sort of interesting convergence that when you start being able to recall your past, when you start being able to amass your own recollections of your experience, it's also the time where you're able to narrate that experience. We're able to put it into words. We're able to capture it. And that might give us a sense that words are used maybe to anchor our experience in the flow of our conscious mental lives that start when we wake up and cease when we go to sleep. Everything's in a flux. Lots happening to you. Your senses are continually bombarded, and you're constantly getting inputs from what you smell and see and touch and taste all around you. But language gives you that chance to anchor that experience, to hold on to it, to pin it down a little bit, and maybe that helps you to recall and to remember it. It's an interesting fact that there are other ways of remembering which don't involve language and which can also be very powerful, perhaps because they don't involve language. I'm very interested in the sense of smell. Sense of smell is always operating. People think they smell when they sniff, but you smell all the time. You smell because you breathe. You're always taking in the odors around you. And that's probably why when you sometimes have a smell you haven't smelled for a very long time, it can take you right back to your grandmother's kitchen or to a school friend's house or to a holiday. It can take you back. And in a way that memory is quite uncontaminated because language hasn't got in there, because we're not very good at naming smells. So language hasn't got in there to contaminate it. So there are ways in which we have an aspect of our experience that's not language, but that's an aspect of experience. The sense of self tends to come with speech and with words and with voice. And it's very interesting. Steve was talking to me about another project, a research project that I'm very interested in and that he has contact with, Hearing the Voice, a project in University of Durham. People who hear voices in their heads and who have maybe a very constant voice. And I think all of us know that experience of talking to ourselves in the second person. Oh, you fool, or you need to get going, or whatever it is that you're encouraging or complaining to yourself about. And when you have those voices in your head, they seem like another person. So notice how easily the sense of self goes with a voice or a speaker. And for people who have the awful experience of hearing a voice talking to them in their heads involuntarily, they often say it's like having another person in my head. So language really does provide you with a kind of scaffolding for having that sense of self. And we also narrate our experience. Tomorrow, when you meet someone and they say, oh, what did you do yesterday? You won't give them the blow-by-blow, momentary chaos of the day. You'll assemble it into a lovely story. Well, it started very well, in the morning I did this, I did that, and then in the evening I came to this talk and I watched these films and we had to say, and there'll be a beginning, a middle, and an end. But that wasn't how your day was. That bit of language will tell a story and organize lots and lots of your experience into something that's memorable and something that eventually becomes quite a big part of you. Those stories become your histories. They're the bits of you that you hold on to and that you package up. But before I end, I want to talk about something else that's equally important to us, because if language is about thought and story and anchoring bits of our experience in time, music might be something else. Music might be a way of anchoring our emotions or expressing them or rehearsing them. There's something about music that's very, very interesting, that there's a difference between hearing music, as we do all the time in a busy, noisy city, or when you go into a cafe or a bar, and listening to music. When you're listening to music, that's very active, not just hearing music. And you talk about following the music. When you're listening attentively, you follow it. And that's because there seems to be something like movement in music. It's very tempting to think the music is moving, although it's not. There's one note, there's another note, there's another note. But you tend to follow where the music is going. And it's quite likely that our first encounters with music are very closely connected to dance and to moving our bodies and to moving ourselves and to moving with others. And that sense in which music is about following, music's about following and seeing what comes next, anticipating what comes next, is what gives a very useful description of music that the psychologist David Huron wrote about, and he calls it sweet expectations. I think that's right. Pieces of music that you love, I would know. If I got to look at your playlist, I would know which pieces of music you loved because you'd have listened to them more. And why would you listen? Because you know how they go. But even though you know how they go, you're expecting something to happen, you're anticipating, you're waiting for that lovely moment, and then it happens. And when your expectation is met, you're very, very satisfied, and the brain is very satisfied. And we know that people who through brain injury or stroke can have amusia, they can even have been practicing musicians, can suddenly cease to be able to hear music. And some of them are able to tell you which notes are played. That was C minor, that was a B flat, that was G. They can tell you every note, but they can't hear the music. Because what they can't do is follow a sequence. They can't move in mind and thought to vary the pitches and to expect the ebb and flow. And one of the things that music does is it replicates what's going on in the body. It replicates the physical state of the body. And that's a way in which it captures emotions and it anchors emotions. When you think of a piece of music being sad, it does something that we do. It gets slower when you're sad. You get quieter. Your voice drops. Your energy is coming out of you. And if music suddenly does that, and it also has to indicate that it's now going into an altered state, it often goes from major key to minor key. And it's not true that all over the world the minor key is sad. In Arabic music, the predominant key is always the minor key. Sad music is when you go into the major key, when you register a departure or a change. And when we have that change, and maybe the music suddenly gets softer, lower, quieter, that's the way our breathing goes when we become sad. Very different from grief, where we might have striking violins, where our breath becomes sharp and short when we're crying. But that way in which music is emulating the shape of the body is a way in which I think it also allows us to express another part of our nature. So when you look at what we are as selves, we're creatures who have our senses, our sense of smell, our sense of taste, the feelings at the end of our fingers. We also have language in which we can not just get straight through to the mind of another and communicate directly with them, reach into them as they reach into us. We also keep track of ourselves through our stories. But finally, we also have music. And music's the sense in which we're using rhythm. And the rhythms are going to be very much something that's relating to, departing from, modulating the state of the body. So I think as you watch the films that Lotja has picked for us tonight, you will see something about rhythm and about language and about the musicality, but also the movement in the body and in the mind and the coming together of those things. We're embodied creatures. We're not just minds and we're not just bodies. We're embodied minds, and we use all of this, and we use it all very skillfully. And the wonderful and strange thing about the human being is that it all happens all continuously together in the same conscious state of mind, as if it was all easily fused together into a single continuous whole. And it's only when we have the unfortunate experiences that Lotja went through, and I'm so glad recovered from, when we see things going wrong, you realize how many pieces of that incredible symphony and orchestra all have to be there, all have to be working, all have to be active to keep in place what you have now, that effortless sense that it's you, listening, hearing, with everything happening in the same conscious space. It's an incredible miracle that the brain systems make that possible, and if anything, it's a strange thing that it does. When you see people suffering damage, neurological damage or disease, and you see them losing some of these capacities or having a very strange experience, the question for us should be, why aren't we more like them? Why isn't that more natural to be like that? What actually happens to us is an incredible feat. And I think we're going to see many representations of those incredible things tonight in the films. So, thank you very much.